So today I wanted to talk a little bit about music theory, what it's for, why we do it, and all of that kind of malarkey. So music theory for me is a useful set of guidelines that can help you understand what's going on in music. So let me just take, for instance, a typical lick. This is one I got from Wes Montgomery, and take you through the process of music theory, right? Okay, so I'll put the notes up on the screen so you can see what they are. Now this is obviously a series of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 notes. It's not a scale, it's not an arpeggio, it's not simple chord tones, it's a combination of several different things. And in this case, this chord progression happens over the chord progression C minor, F7, B flat major, right? Okay. So already we've used a bit of music theory here because I'm talking about, for instance, that chord progression being these chords, C minor, F7, B flat major. Now most of us would assume that kind of knowledge of the chord qualities and their names would be pretty basic to playing music, because most of us play music off charts and lead sheets and so on. But it may in fact surprise you to learn that there are in fact jazz musicians, both historical and around today, who don't even know the names of the chords they're playing. So anyway, we have these three chords, okay, and the naming, the nomenclature of these chords is important. C minor 7, F7, B flat major 7th, right? And now in terms of our modern music theory, we think of those as being C minor 7, F7, B flat major 7th. That's quite important to sort of make the distinction. But actually, if you're somebody like Joe Pass, for instance, you might just have thought there was C minor, F7, B flat major. That's often how I say the names of chords on my videos, not because I'm lazy, well maybe because I'm lazy, but also because actually I think it's good to have a more generalized idea of what chord functions are. If you have an interesting little chord voicing like this, or that, or maybe this or something, it's a nice one, to call that an F7 might seem a little bit perverse, but actually that's what you would use it as. I'd use that as, this is a C minor 7th type chord, this is a F7 type chord, and maybe this sort of thing here, I'm going to play, that, or this, or this, or this, that's a B flat major, right? This is B flat major, okay? So by having sort of general umbrella names for lots of different chords, I actually make them maximally applicable. God, that's a pretentious way of putting it, but you know what I mean. I can make them useful to me in a number of different contexts beyond just like, obviously most people realise that a B flat major 7th can be used as a B flat major, but then what does that information tell you? In B flat major 7th, there's a certain sound. That major 7th is suitable for some situations, but not all. Perhaps in others you might prefer a 6-9, or perhaps you might prefer to, voice a B flat major 7th like that, for instance, or like this. Or like this. Well, that's got a 13th on top, So I find like already just by how loose or specific you are with the naming of your chords, you have different ways of looking at them. Now, so I think theory itself is a matter of categorization, an abstraction of what's going on in music. Now, if you were to accurately categorize every single note and chord that you ever played, you wouldn't have a theory of music, you'd have an actuality of music. And in fact, that's what notation does. If you write down a score of music, if you write down a score of everything I play, transcribe it exactly, then you have the exact thing that I played. Now, of course, that doesn't tell you anything about how the music works, because plenty of classical musicians can play, works by Chopin, Bach, Mozart, whoever, and not have a clue what's going on in the harmony. They don't need to, because they're executing the music exactly. So the process of theory is actually a process of reduction or abstraction. So, for instance, if I take this lick, which I'll play for you again. Okay, so we've got several ways of understanding that. Now, a chord scale explanation might say, well, over the F7 chord, we have this sharp 9, flat 9, and then a 1, and then this flat 7th. And then over this we have a 9th and a passing tone and a 3rd. From there you might abstract this line as being belonging to certain chord scales. So for instance, I say the F7 has these notes on it. That implies the use of either the altered scale, or the octatonic half-whole diminished, for instance, which would be like this. Now, if you're a Barry Harris fan, you might say, well, actually, this is actually a relationship not between the F7, but actually between the half diminished chord on C, which happens to be the same as a B flat 7 or a B flat 9th chord. Okay, the same thing basically, and we're going to play B flat dominant scale. And then we're using what Barry Harris would call a surround, or in this case actually a 4 phrase, into B flat. So it's a completely different understanding, right? In practice, Wes Montgomery doesn't play anything in this line that might make us think that he uses the melodic minor modes or the octatonic scale. That is an analysis, an abstraction. We're taking something which is very minimal, really. It's seven notes, 4 notes over that particular chord, and we're abstracting a whole world of possibilities from it. And I think that is actually one of the engines which drives jazz forwards. So although, you know, it's customary on this channel to take the mickey out of chord scale theory because it's fun, actually chord scale theory is itself a misunderstanding of bebop, which actually led to a lot of interesting developments in jazz. The altered scale sound is now a familiar one from contemporary players, and, you know, actually it goes back about 50 or 60 years. As Kenny Werner points out, you know, we're not dealing with something which is, you know, modern jazz anymore. The altered scale is part of the furniture. I'm pretty certain that Wes Montgomery didn't know a Superlocrian scale from a hole in the road. I mean, he might have played those sounds even, but not known them. In any case, he did play the melodic minor, for instance. The reason why I know that, well, I listened to the records, okay? So it's like, this is kind of an important thing. Like, people just talk about theory as if it's somehow prescriptive, as if you can read the Big Book of Jazz, probably by Martin Levine, and have an idea of how it all operates, and that's completely untrue. The correct way to use theory, whether it's Mark Levine's or anybody else's, is to actually study the music and approach it in some depth. And learning phrases like this, for instance, one of the most important things I would say is learning where the chord tones are, because if you start on, that's basically what it is, right? Then we have a little rhythmic delay, which is what the enclosure is for. Or sorry, 1. But if I just started it on a bit off the beat, 1, 2, and 3. Obviously it's that, but if I started it on the beat, I would need to add an extra note, or maybe take one out. So, for instance, the rhythmic coupling between the notes you play, one, and a note, or 1. So that, you know, is a rhythmic theory of how harmony works. I'm just looking at these. And you can even take that as being a tritone substitute for the F7. It's a B7, right? So I'm not trying to confuse you. I'm not trying to even necessarily teach you anything here. What I want to try to do is actually give you a meta understanding, a deeper understanding of what's going on, which is that I have already suggested 4 or 5 different interpretations of what's going on with this simple 7-note phrase, okay? Which you choose is really dependent on you, because there's a million different jazz educators out there, and they all have variations of how they teach, for instance, jazz harmony, and some of them teach it in broadly similar ways, and some of them don't teach it in the same way at all. So your responsibility as a learner, if you like, is to get into the players that you like, get into the music that you like, and really start to drill down into exactly what notes everybody's playing, and then see if any of it makes any sense to you. Because if you go, oh, I can see quite clearly that Charlie Parker here is playing the tritone substitute over the dominant, then that will make a lot more sense, especially as you'll be able to hear it, because you've just spent like maybe a few minutes puzzling out the phrase by ear, which is the best way to work. If you do that, then you will actually have a much more intimate and detailed knowledge of theory than you would if you read a million theory books. And that's just the way people have always learned. In the old days, jazzers might have had their own private names for things. I don't know what Wes Montgomery called this sound, but but he definitely used it. So he definitely had, I think, a conception of it, because the way people think is not in individual notes. Playing by ear isn't like that note, that note, that note, that note. We all have little phrases. So whether Wes Montgomery said that, oh, that's sort of an interesting phrase to play on an F7. It's got a darker sound than normal. Maybe he had his own private name for it. Maybe nobody else knew what that name was. Okay. There's an interesting interview which I'll post between Jimmy Bruno and Bruce Forman, where they talk about the weird names that some of the old guys had for concepts that we're now familiar with. In particular, they're talking about the functional sort of harmony and jazz standards, the typical kind of cliche chord progressions you might get. That's what I really wanted to say. And theory and analysis is very much part of the art form. How you interpret something and what you take away from an idea or something that you hear is far more important than some idea of right and wrong. And I think if it's something which I find a little bit suspect, perhaps, or unhelpful about a lot of the jazz education I've been through, is that it's often been too prescriptive. And the thing is, if you have 3 or 4 jazz teachers, they'll all contradict each other, and that's a wonderful thing. Because, to quote Cecil Taylor, the great free jazz pianist, every man or woman is their own academy, okay? So the idea that every person has their own understanding, their own map of the music is a profoundly beautiful thing, it's great. Yet we're all able to work together, we're all able to play together somehow. Anyway, thanks for watching, I hope that's useful and not too long. Bye!